Coming up on today's show, Eleanor OBrien is the artistic director of Dance Naked Creative, a sex-positive theater and event company. She is a writer, performer, and facilitator. She is the creator of solo shows, Plan V, How to Really, Really, Really Love a Woman, GGG, Dominatrix for Dummies, and Lust and Marriage. She directed and starred in the Inviting Desire series, ensemble productions that include A Theatrical Aphrodisiac, Lubricate Your Libido, Pleasure, Permission, Possibility, and The Dawn of Sex. She has produced and directed the community cabarets What Is Erotic, Revelations, and Sex We Can, and is the founder of the biennial sex and culture theater festival Come Inside. She hosts the monthly erotic open mic Stand Up Smut and teaches workshops exploring the intersection between sexuality and creativity. She holds an MFA from the University of San Diego, Old Globe Theater. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up after the break, my conversation with Eleanor OBrien.
Are you bored with dick pics? Do random hookups and empty chats kill your vibe? Tired of being catfished or wasting time with messages from faceless profiles? Then you need to get Monogamish, a new dating app designed for singles and couples of all genders and sexualities, looking for dates, mates, and everything in between. Access exclusive matchmaking events, workshops with dating and sexuality gurus, and exclusive offers so hot you'll just have to see for yourself. Download Monogamish for free from Google Play or the Apple App Store. Monogamish. Explore fluid relationships.
Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am tickled pink to be here with Eleanor OBrien, whom I'm technically meeting for the first time right now, but her reputation precedes her, and I got to know her because she did an amazing performance that I was super sad, had some FOMO that I missed at the World Domination Summit. I guess that was last year. Gosh, it seems so long ago. But thank you for being here, Ellen. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
What a joy. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So I'd love it if you maybe just talk a little bit about yourself in your own words. I already shared your bio with everybody, but I'd like to give you a moment just to share.
Yeah. So I run a theater company called Dance Naked Creative, formerly Dance Naked Productions. But I changed the name, one, because I got kicked off Instagram. So I was like, fuck you, I will get back on in my devious ways. But I also felt like the company was expanding from just doing productions to doing a fair amount of workshops and events during the pandemic. I started a speed dating thing during the pandemic, and I was like, that can kind of come under the auspices of Dance Naked. So I've been doing it since about 2005. I make shows about sexuality. And the reason I called it Dance Naked was because I wanted an image of something that was joyful and vulnerable. And because that's what I wanted to see on stage. And it has caused me no end of grief over the years because people have such different expectations for what I am going to have at the theater. I'm not a stripper. I don't do burlesque. It's very much storytelling based theater. But yeah, when I had to make up my company name, it was my first Fringe festival I was going to up in Canada. And, I just sort of sat there and I thought, what do I want my theater company to embody? And that was the image that came to me. So I have been trying to make sex positive theater that feels vulnerable and joyful for the last 17 years. And I just closed a show last night. So it's funny. This morning I was like, why did I agree to do a podcast today?
Well, I definitely honor you for being here then. And I can't.
But it was a good one. This show is called Plan V, the the Pussy Parables and Epiphanies. And it's a show that grew out of a solo show I did called Plan V, The Joyful Cult of Pussy Worship. So this show is sort of the 2.0 version of this global cult, if you will, that is all about sharing stories about pussy. And I have a line in the show where I say, when I say pussy, I mean generic for genitals of all kinds, sort of like how mankind is generic for all humanity, right? So I talk about, we all have pussy. And because I want it to feel like a show that's very inclusive of everyone.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so that show last night has other people's stories in it, not just mine. So it was a beautiful experience, and now it's done. And I'm here with you.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's a delight to meet you. Your energy is infectious. I already am kind of like falling in love with you because I just think that the work that you're doing is incredible. Like if I could come back in another life, I'd love to be doing what you're doing. Like it's powerful and beautiful and fun and joyous. I love how you put that word in there too. So and I definitely want to talk more about your work and hopefully come meet you in person and see one of your shows. We were just talking about coming up with reasons for me to come out to your way to Portland. So, but before we dive into that, I'd love to, if I may, learn a little bit more about like kind of where you came from. So I love to ask what I call the light bulb moment questions. So maybe when you were growing up, whether it was in school or wherever, was there a moment where you realized you were going to color outside the lines in some way of heteronormative monogamy, or that you were going to be like really sex positive in a sex negative world, or what was it for you?
I am super lucky that I have parents that allowed me to really be my full self from the time I was a kid. And I grew up in a theater family. My mother, many people in my family are involved in the arts. And when I was 8 years old, I got to be a part of a show called The Jewel Box here in Portland, Oregon. And it was put on by this brilliant impresario named Rick Young. And the story, it was a devised piece of theater that he created. And the story was based on a gay man who gets one wish, like from a genie kind of. And the wish was to live a life without shame. And this is the 1980, right? It was just at the beginning of, AIDS was just coming into public awareness. I mean, actually, I don't remember AIDS coming into awareness until I was in high school. But Rick Young did eventually die of AIDS. But this play was about being gay in this culture, which at the time, if you recall, if you are in any way in my generation, where the way I grew up, being gay was a negative thing, for many, many people. I feel like it's just so radically changed now. It's kind of bizarre to think back to that time, like where we made fun of being gay. It's just so shocking to me now. But anyway, so I got to play a young boy. I was in one scene in this play of when this man gets to go back and do his life over without shame. And this play featured gay men living their best life, right? So there was a scene in which they were all in like leather chaps and rhinestone cock rings. And on stage, there was a Harley. And like, it was this sort of just a homoerotic fantasy, right? And I would watch from the wings and just be riveted by it. Like, I can't wait to grow up and be a gay man.
That is awesome. Right?
I don't know if you've ever interviewed Rachel Lark, but she's a wonderful singer-songwriter. And she has a great song called, I Wish I Was a Gay Man on the West Coast.
That's funny.
And then I discovered Armstead Maupin's books when I was about 12, which are the Tales of the City books that were made into a Netflix series, I think, Olympia Dukakis. But so that was these wonderful stories about being a gay man in San Francisco. And then when I was 14, I did a show that was sponsored by Planned Parenthood that was about teen sexuality. And And that was, so I, in my mind, that sort of combination of experiences really cemented for me the power of theater to tell stories about things that were taboo.
Right.
And theater as an educational tool, entertainment as an educational tool. And for me, I was always the go-to person for my friends in high school about, sex and, because part of the thing that Planned Parenthood did was educate us. And then we wrote a show based on what we'd learned, and we toured at local high schools. And so the thing that I feel so lucky about was that I found a way to express what I found was a profoundly disturbing aspect of culture, which was that we don't talk about shit.
Right.
That sex is somehow private. And to me, it's still, rage is not really the right word. I want to say like it enraged me, but it frustrated me to no end as a kid that like there was this thing that we all knew was happening. Right. It was somehow naughty or bad to talk about it. And so I feel like I've made it my life's mission.
Yes.
Like, we're going to talk about this shit. So in my shows, like this show I did last night, I bring up yeast infections. I bring up BV. I bring up, like feeling like it's your responsibility to be wet, and that, having a lover introduce lube into the conversation is somehow like a failing on my part or whatever, right? These things that I feel like if we could only just express them and normalize it. And it's exactly what you're doing with your podcast. Can we just normalize that we all have these feelings of jealousy and also aversion, and so thank you for your service as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, your story really resonates with me from similar angles and also opposite angles, in that I'm excited that you had that experience where you were exposed to the theater, you were exposed to talking about things with your parents, like being so open-minded. For me, I grew up with a very conservative background. We did not talk about feelings in my household. My parents pretty much had a sexless marriage. They lived in separate bedrooms my whole life, believe it or not. And I went to 12 years of Catholic school. So I was taught guilt and shame and masturbation. You're going to go blind, and gays are going to hell, all that stuff. Well, so, and similar to you, I was also, once I understood what sex was, like my sex talk with my mom, I jokingly tell the story, was we never talked about the birds and the bees. We just watched that weird video when you're 9 at school where they teach you about masturbation. I mean, not menstruation.
Menstruation.
Yeah, menstruation. Thank you. And when I was leaving one time when I was about 16, my mom said, okay, well, be home by curfew and don't get pregnant. And I was like, that's the talk, But so like you in high school, I was always frustrated when like my girlfriends never wanted to talk about sex. Like they didn't even want to talk about kissing boys. I was like, well, come on, like give it up. Like what happened, and nobody would talk about it. And I was telling you before we recorded, I started this podcast, I think it was 2015. And I used the World Domination Summit where you and I almost met as the impetus to do it. I was like, by the time I get on the plane to go to World Domination Summit in Portland, Oregon, I'm going to have 3 episodes of this Loving Without Boundaries podcast out there. And for me, it's really like being a late bloomer in some ways to create this environment where we can talk about open relationships, where we can talk about sex, where we can say penis and vagina and yeast infections and whatever we want to say. So I honor that you got to start that journey very early on. And I'm happy for you. I'm delighted. And I also am glad that I was able to go on my kind of like winding journey to get over to where I am now, to bring you and I to this conversation, which is just magic to me, Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm so jealous that that's your job. You get to just have conversations with people about relationships and sex. Like, how cool is that?
Well, I'm jealous about your job, so that's fun, in a really cool way. So what I'd love to understand is maybe a little bit more about. So what I'm hearing is from a young age, you had a fertile environment to love the theater, to learn how that could be an educational and entertainment tool, and that you could be your own person. Mm-hmm. So were you kind of just very fluidly kind of sex positive that whole time? And, or how did, like, tell me just a little bit more about kind of growing up as you.
I really, yes, I was. I really was super excited to have sex. I feel very lucky that I don't have a lot of trauma around sex. I don't have a lot of stories of like, being inappropriately touched or, so that feels so lucky because the more I meet people and talk to them, I'm like, oh shit, so many people carry trauma. And that has definitely influenced my theater. I used to be very rah, like, yay, orgasms for all. And now I much more incorporate that has not been everybody's experience. And I try to have a more balanced kind of take on the world. But I would say, so when I was a teenager, I was kind of a weird fish out of water. I grew up in a conservative town, and I was definitely the freaky kid, who did theater and whose parents were liberals and all that. But I had this plan that I was going to lose my virginity at 16. That seemed appropriate to me, and 16 came and went. No one wanted it.
Oh man.
Anyway, so yeah, I never had a boyfriend in high school. I think I was just intimidating. At least that's what my mother said. Not intimidating to the boys. It never occurred to me at that time to date women. That took many years. And then in college, I basically gave it up to the person who asked. Like, he took me on one date and I was like, all right, let's do this. And it was because I wanted to know what it was like. I was so curious about it. And I've always been so curious about it. So yeah, but I was also really indoctrinated and steeped in the monogamy romance culture. I was obsessed with romance novels. I started reading them at probably 10 years old. And I started with the Sweet Valley Highs. And then I, graduated to Harlequins and Bodice Rippers. And my mother would call them titty romances. And my parents hated that I read all these titty romances. But I stewed in that, right? So for me, like finding a boyfriend was always like my number one thing. I was like, every time I found a penny on the sidewalk or blew out the candles, it was like, I hope I get a boyfriend. I hope I get a boyfriend. And so yeah, that was my truth for so many years, was having a boyfriend was like the best thing ever. Which of course, as we know, it's not really the best thing ever when it's, full of drama and jealousy and does he really like me and all
right.
But I had to go through all of that. And then I met my husband when I was 33. And I had just come back to Portland. I'd been living in New York City and I had toured my first solo show across Canada. Wow. That was a show about my attempt at being a dominatrix. I was a terrible dominatrix. That's what the show is about. But the night I met him, I had been in Portland for maybe 2 weeks and I was sort of deciding, do I move to LA? Do I move to Chicago? And I went to a romp. It was put on by a group called, it wasn't Friends and Lovers. It was it'll come to me, but it was sort of like a sex positive group here in Portland. And it was a sexy party. And I met Eric and we actually didn't get together that night. I thought he was with somebody else, but we met again at another party a week later. And we just really hit it off. And I went home with him that night. And the next day we talked about, what we were looking for, kind of. And he had just literally the week before split with his wife. They had, she'd moved out. They had sort of been emotionally estranged for, 6 months or so, but that she had just moved out and he celebrated by going to this sexy party where he met me. And I went, and so he told me on our first date, I really like you. I would like to be with you, but I just ended this marriage and I want to explore other people. And I had read Ethical Slut. And I went, oh, I've heard of this. I know about this thing. Okay. I'm in. Let's try that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think what often happens with people who are like, let's try to be in an open relationship. We had so much NRE that we didn't actually open our relationship for another year and a half,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Loved being together, and we were so excited to be in relationship, and we moved in together a week later. I mean, wow, we just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so when we finally, he went on, his first date a year and a half later, I was enraged. I was so angry, even though it was something we had talked about. We had even gone to therapy to sort of, do preventative care, like, we're going to have an open relationship, and we're going to have good communication. And, and so when it finally came down to actually doing it, it was like so freaky to me. And, I really struggled. But it was a really good thing, because then I got to really look at all these assumptions I had made over the years.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Love and everything.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Yeah, so that was my sort of my long winding journey that brought me to polyamory, and then I like I said before the show started, I wrote a show about it, which brought me into contact with many resources and people, and podcasts. So I was trying to learn about the experiences.
And which was that show?
That show was called Lust and Marriage. And the sort of core of it was my experience of falling. What I wanted was to write a love story about polyamory where it wasn't negative. Because I felt like every portrayal that I saw in media, somebody gets hurt, or, there's something that goes wrong. And now I think it's really different. Like in the last 10 years, I think we're definitely seeing more positive portrayals. Mm-hmm. But at the time in 2015, I felt like there was a real dearth of love. So I wanted to write a love story. And I set as the framework, a character very much based on me, who I called Emily, who writes back and forth with Dan Savage and asks Dan his advice about all of these, the challenges of being in an open relationship. Mm-hmm. And I toured it all over. I took that show actually all across Canada. I took it to Europe.
Wow.
And it was wonderful because I got to interact with so many poly communities, That's how I met Cunning Minx. And
nice.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I'm sorry I missed it. I don't know if is there any way that if people do want to see it? Oh, yes. Oh, that'd be amazing. Are we allowed to put it in the show notes? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes. So incredible. Let me just write a note that we're going to do that. So that's awesome. Well, what a great, beautiful story. Like, you're a great storyteller. I can see why you do the theater. And also, of course, our listeners can't see it, but we have our cameras on, just your expressions and just your inflection of your voice. I can just imagine how incredible you would be on stage. So, but a great job just kind of giving us an overview of your life, really. And it's totally fascinating. So much resonated with me, like being that freaky kid, and just the romance culture. And we are in the same generation, so we've kind of been going along the same kind of timeline through time. So I was reading some of those same romance novels. I also read there's actually a new movie that's coming out about the Margaret, where they talk about.
Oh, are you there? God, it's me, Margaret.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh my gosh. So I have a new boyfriend. Very excited about this.
Okay.
And he just gave me for Valentine's Day. He got me that book.
Oh, that's great.
It's Judy Blume's Forever, which was one of the first sex scenes I ever read.
Wow.
A first time sex scene in this book.
Yeah.
And it's so dear. Oh my God, I remember crying and crying. Anyway.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I just saw that movie's coming out because I actually, on my Valentine's date with one of my partners, that was one of the previews that we got to see. But so I was reading all those books too. So I really just, also just I love when things just kind of line up. So there's different ways that you grew up that were not similar to mine, but some that are oddly similar. So I didn't lose my virginity till I was 18. For me, the reason was because I was a good Catholic girl and I wasn't willing to wait till marriage. I wasn't willing to do that. But I thought, well, if I'm an adult, then I can make the decision. And I did have kind of a trauma story around that. It wasn't like a date rape or anything like that. But we had sex on Monday at senior week with this boy that I took to the prom. And by Wednesday, I literally found him in bed with another girl.
Oh,
2 days later. And I was not, polyamorous at the time,
right.
So that kind of like heartbreak.
That is heartbreak.
Yeah. But, but it started the journey of just dating, but I was coming from a monogamous mindset. And I met my husband on Match.com when we were still kind of in that monogamy world. He was 33. His name is Eric.
Oh,
isn't that trippy? And he's, still my husband today. I was 34 at the time. Wow. I just thought that was funny just to hear you tell your story. But thank you for sharing all that, just how you got from A to B, just the twists and the turns, and also that you two went to try and do preventative care. So I'm curious, when you did go to, I think you said counseling, was that helpful for you? Like, did that help you to do that ahead of time? Or did you still feel like you have to just go through the experience?
I want to say, yeah, but no. I mean, I feel like it was so theoretical, right? And it was like, oh, yes, we're going to communicate and we're going to treat each other with real care and compassion. And that was all true. We actually didn't have a lot of, stress around our relationship. It wasn't that difficult. But I feel like what did happen was that I really, so Eric was, like I would almost describe, and so would he, as him being somewhat on the spectrum. He never felt jealousy. He just didn't. I really did. And I had to deal with it. And one of the ways that I dealt with my jealousy was to get angry and like find something that he had done wrong. And when I look back on it, it seems so obvious, right? Like I just made one of the funny things that I'll tell a story about was that one of our rules was no fluid exchange with other people. Like we were fluid bonded, right? But for me, that meant I could give somebody else a blowjob as long as I didn't swallow their cum. Like, because then I was like, well, that's not exchanging fluids, right? Like they can finish off on their stomach or whatever. But for Eric to go down on a woman, he had to use a dental dam. He couldn't avoid her fluids, right? And poor Eric, so he completely ignores that, that rule of the agreement because he has no idea, like, where do you even get a dental dam? He's so not, it was just what, he didn't plan ahead to pack a dental dam in his, briefcase. So I made that a big deal, like that was a betrayal, that he had broken our agreements kind of thing. So I feel like a lot of the learning curve of my relationship was learning how to look at my own predilection towards how am I the victim, right? And how is he doing this wrong? And so much of the growth for me in being in an open relationship was learning how to look at my own shit and be like, how am I creating this? So I feel like once I kind of realized that I had that pattern, it was a lot easier for us to move through it. Yeah,
that's powerful. Yeah, I love how vulnerably you shared that and the learnings. That it's always easier, right, to talk about the learnings like years later.
Yeah,
we're in the middle of it, but I love that, just that you were able to look at your own predilection to be the victim, and that great question, like, how am I creating this myself? How am I contributing to whatever's going on, whether it's drama or betrayal stories? I think we've all done that, create these betrayal stories. So thank you for sharing that. So where would you say you are now on your journey? And you can talk first maybe just about your life, but then I'd love to hear how that led into the theater.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the Lust and Marriage was a story about being, madly in love with my husband. And yet, when we first met, he wanted to have an open relationship. I agreed to it. Mm-hmm. So it's partly about that journey and how we had this rule, I think a lot of people start with, that you can have sex with other people, but not fall in love with other people, which was, as we know, is a completely bullshit idea. Because feelings happen, mm-hmm. and they should happen. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I learned, and that's why I wanted to write a show about it, was in creating that. And it was my rule. I created that rule because I was so threatened by the idea of him falling in love with somebody else, mm-hmm. That I cut him off from his heart. Mm-hmm. And what a shitty thing that was to do, to say, you can fuck another woman, but you can't have feelings for her. Why would you do that to somebody? And of course I can see why I did it, but it was, so the play that I tell, I fall in love with somebody else. Oh, so okay. I had the experience of, being oh, it actually is possible to love two people at one time. Mm-hmm. And so that show very much reflected my life until the summer of 2015, when I took it on tour. And actually what was happening that summer was my marriage was dissolving. It wasn't dissolving because we were polyamorous. It was mm-hmm. dissolving because it had come to the end of its time. And, we both had different paths to follow, mm-hmm. which I absolutely do not think is a bad thing. I think at this point in my life, I'm relationships change. Mm-hmm. And when you rail against that, then that's what causes problems. For me, I had the easiest divorce of anybody I've ever met. We decided, okay, it's time. And, we actually didn't divorce until 2018, but we, we had, like I said, separate paths. And then the funny thing is the boyfriend that I had while we were married, he and I ended up monogamous because he was actually more comfortable being monogamous. And I was sort of fine with that. Until I wasn't. And what I discovered in that relationship was I had started going to a group up in Seattle called Relationship Anarchy. Mm. And I really resonated a lot with that group, and it felt very helpful for me. Mm-hmm. So I started a group in Portland, and that's, I no longer run it, but those groups still exist here. I think there's a number of them now. And for me, Relationship Anarchy was more accurate, because what I realized in that dynamic with my boyfriend was, this relationship works better as a monogamous relationship. It was more helpful for his nervous system. Mm-hmm. He wasn't somebody who I think did polyamory well, and didn't want to really. It had started out that way because he was my boyfriend and I was married, and we just had one night a week together. Mm-hmm. But then when it was just him and I, he very much wanted it to, he didn't want the stress of me being with other people. Mm. And so I agreed to that because most of my needs were getting met. But then when that relationship ended, I started having multiple lovers again. And that's been since, 2017 or so. And that has really felt right for me, is to have multiple lovers. And so now very much I consider myself a relationship anarchist, because I think the form of your relationship changes depending on who you're in a relationship with. Mm-hmm. And so now I have two lovers who are about to meet. They haven't met yet. Mm-hmm. It's funny. One of them was there on Valentine's Day, and then the next night, the other one was there. And I thought about having them meet at the theater, but then I was like, you know what, Eleanor, you're already doing enough with, doing this whole show. So we'll see. But I think they're going to meet this weekend. And I'm super excited. It's the first time not the first time, because my husband and my boyfriend got along well, but I really feel like right now I'm in a place of there's just nothing fraught about it. They both know about each other. They both already like each other. They, they met on Zoom.
Okay.
I do a thing every month called Stand Up Smut, which is an erotic open mic. And it used to be just in person here in Portland. But then during the pandemic, I started doing it on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And now people can come from all over the world. And I do it both in person and on Zoom. So they just met last month on Zoom. They were both at Stand Up Smut.
That's so fun.
Yeah. So now they're going to get to meet in person. But they both have so much like love for me and my best interest at heart. And they want me to have more love in my life. And so I feel super lucky right now because, neither one of them has displayed a speck of jealousy or, concern even. So
that's incredible. I'm so happy for you. And you're just glowing, just the joy is just kind of emanating from you. So I'm thrilled for you that you've gone on this incredible journey. You're the heroine of your own novel, and now you're at this place in time, right? Where you're at this moment where you've got these lovers who are really supportive. And I love what you said about that. They want you to have love in your life. They're not trying to like shut you down or put some armor around your heart or anything like that.
No, I feel so lucky. I mean, I have to tell you, Kitty, it has been a journey. Like I am fairly well known where I live, because I've been doing it for a long time, right? So people know me and I'm very much sort of like a sex positive figure in the community. Mm-hmm. My shows are always about sex. And it's intimidating as fuck to some men, like I started having this like flirtation with this guy on OkCupid and, it went back and forth for like a week and a half or so. And it was getting all crackly and kind of fun. And then he totally ghosted me. And I thought, that is weird. Like that doesn't happen to me very often. And then he came back with, I just couldn't imagine introducing you to my mother. And I was like, well, let me relieve you of that. Bye. Yeah. But the sort of irony of it is like, mothers love me because I'm a really good partner to their sons or, whatever. Like, it was just such a funny thing. But I think, people come with their own history,
Yeah.
And I think it has been challenging for me to find partners that really just support all that I am and what I put out into the world. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I do feel really lucky to have.
That's incredible. And yeah, and I really can empathize and totally understand that too. Like to be a strong, assertive, sex positive powerhouse, and a celebrity in your own right, in your world, it's like that's a big deal and it can be intimidating. And it's I'm so glad that you've been able to find partners that you're with today that are able to, hold space for the badass that you are, because you are. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. And also you like owning it. Like, yeah, man, it's been a journey and to get to where I am now. And this is who I am and I'm proud of it. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So one thing I'd love to wrap my head around is, so when did you start the theater?
Around 2005.
Oh, that's right. Well, I think we said that before. Mm-hmm.
At first it was just me and I did a solo show and that was true for a couple of years. And then in 2009, Portland had a thing called the Fertile Ground Festival. And it was just in its first year. And it was the invitation was to make new work. And I had this idea. Have you ever come across the book, My Secret Garden?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Women's Sexual Fantasies. Mm-hmm. I loved that book. I mean, my copy was dog-eared. That was such masturbation material. Mm-hmm. But I kept thinking, what would it be like to hear this on stage? Like, I was sort of obsessed with that idea of putting sexuality on stage that wasn't for the purview of men, but it wasn't about, because I feel like burlesque and that kind of thing, I loved it. And I also felt like it's sort of catering to a male sensibility. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to see what would happen if you put women's sexuality on stage that wasn't about being sexy. And so that was the first group show I ever did. And it ended up being super successful and just really exciting to work on. And so I did another 3 versions of that show with different casts and different fantasies.
And which one was that show?
That was called Inviting Desire.
Ooh, nice. Okay.
And it was, and the funny thing was, the reason I called it Inviting Desire was because I personally struggled so much with the concept of desire and my own, and this is strange to me. I don't really know where this came from, but my own shame around feeling desire. And when I was growing up, if I was attracted to somebody or I liked a guy, like I wouldn't be able to talk to him. I'd leave the room. Like I just had this intense shyness. Like I could go from being this public, funny, bubbly, extrovert to so shy. And the idea of somebody finding out that I was attracted to them was horrific to me. And the reason it was horrific was because they could then reject me. And I didn't realize, and I didn't even know until this year that there's this rejection dysphoria thing that sometimes because I've been reading a lot about ADHD and I think I qualify. And somebody told me about like this rejection dysphoria syndrome. And I was like, oh my God, I think I have that because I was so scared of it for so long. Inviting Desire was my attempt to artistically explore what is it like to feel desire and arousal and be open about it and not hide it. And it was so liberating. It was such a liberating experience. Yeah, to talk about masturbation and all sorts of stuff. So I ended up doing that first show is Inviting Desire, A Theatrical Aphrodisiac. And then the next one was subtitled Pleasure, Permission, Possibility. And then we did one that was all about polyamory and open relationships that was called The Dawn of Sex. That, sort of loosely based on Sex at Dawn.
Sure.
And that was really fun. There's some clips of that on my website. I think.
Nice.
And then I started opening up to having men involved because all those shows were all women.
Okay.
And I wanted to work with all genders. So then I started doing more of almost like a community cabaret where I invited people to come to me with their ideas and I would help them develop their pieces and I'd create a sort of curated show around it. And there was a show called What Is Erotic that a group in San Francisco, the 418 company, put on, which was basically that concept. Like they'd have a theme and anybody in the community could audition. And so I, what is it called when you have franchised it? I franchised it. And I did that and I tried that. And then the next year I kind of just went off on my own and I created a show called Revelations and then one called Sex We Can. And so these shows were always like, so Sex We Can, the theme was, what is the sexual future you want to live into? And at that show, I did a piece that was about an experience that I'd had of having a man go down on me and having this experience of sort of what I describe as seeing goddess. And that was based on, I really had a hard time accepting or receiving oral sex. I just felt really uncomfortable with it. Just sort of around that idea that somebody's feeling obligated, like, they're going to go down on you because you went down on them, but not because they really enjoy it. Right. And so in that show, I was exploring that idea and I'd had this experience of a man going down on me and I'd fantasized that I was like a temple priestess and he was paying homage to the goddess. And that fantasy allowed me to overcome all of my own genital shame and, fear and to really enjoy it. And so I thought, oh, that is a cool thing. I want to share this. So I wrote like a 15-minute piece about it that was in Sex We Can. And I enjoyed doing it so much that I ended up expanding it into an hour-long show. And that became a show called How to Really, Really, Really Love a Woman. And it was a show that takes place 10 years in the future. And it was after the Great Awakening when we all have learned how to, honor the sacred vulva and everything. And so that show, I tell this story about this man going down on me and I had this epiphany and I connect with the goddess and she comes through me and is giving me life lessons and instructions. And I am not a person who grew up religious at all. So this was very exciting, to me that I had this connection to the divine. So I did that show and I toured that show for a couple of years. And then I was going to go to the Edinburgh Fringe the summer that the pandemic began. So that whole tour got put on pause. And what happened in the interval during the pandemic was I created a new show for Zoom. And that show was called The Cult of Cunnilingus. And it was about how did the Great Awakening come to be? Like, how do we get to that place 10 years in the future? And I was like, oh, somebody has to start it. Somebody has to start this cult of the Great Awakening. And I called it Plan V. And Plan V became, so Cult of Cunnilingus was the Zoom show. And then, the world opened up. And so I was going to go back to Edinburgh or, go there for the first time. But I realized the show that I had written, How to Really, Really Love a Woman, needed to evolve. And so it evolved into Plan V, the joyful cult of pussy worship, in which I basically create the cult that people like. So the audience are all like at this meetup group. And the story that I was telling about the man going down on me, that's still the centerpiece of that show. But now it's Eleanor proselytizing about her experience as a member of Plan B. And so that's the show that I took to Edinburgh. And then the show that had just closed last night is the evolution of that show, in which it's not just Eleanor telling her pussy story. Now members of the community are telling their stories.
Wow.
So that's kind of how that has evolved. Yeah.
Holy Hannah, what an incredible breadth of work. And just brilliant how you started here and had this genesis of an idea, and you just kept building on it and building on it. Just an incredible breadth of work. So I'd love to just ask, like, there's so much to be proud of there. If you had to narrow it down, like, what are some of your greatest accomplishments or the most rewarding part of what you've been doing with the theater?
Thanks for that question. It is so thrilling to me to see other people be influenced and inspired. So I have helped direct a number of solo shows and had people who started out as doing a piece in my show and then went on to do their own solo shows. And that's been happening since the very first group show. And so I feel like in some ways I've had a small part in helping launch other people's artistic careers. And I started, in 2013 doing workshops in sex and creativity. And like, I think so much of it is just giving people permission and creating space. And like, if you say, hey, do you have stories about your pussy that you'd be willing to share on stage? And people are like, a lot of people are like, no, that's not for me. Thanks very much. But a number of people, said yes to me. We're like, yeah, I'd share my story.
That's so incredible.
So like just in this last 3 days, with the show, I got to hear 12 different stories. We did 4 different storytellers a night. And these women, they were all women. I decided to start with all women for this round. I do invite penis havers in the audience to share. Generally, they don't. But someday. But just giving people space to share opens up so much. And I feel like we heard stories in the show that I guarantee you people have not heard before. And that felt just thrilling to me to be like, okay, now on the drive home, you can talk to your wife or partner about like fisting or, do you feel responsible for getting wet every time? Or would you like me to get out the lube, or, like I told the story about how like I discovered one of my big turn-ons is having people wash their hands before they play with my pussy. Like just that level of respect. Like I'm going to prepare by washing my hands. My pussy feels so much less defended, because I know like I'm not going to get a yeast infection, like or whatever. Like, so that is what drives me, Kitty, is like making space for people to share. It's same as you. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Share their stories.
Yeah. And I guess you're right. It's a different medium. One thing we didn't talk about, and I won't dive too deep into it, but another synergy is I also am a musician and a performer by trade. I learned to play guitar when I was 8. And my father played sax for his entire life, ever since the age of 16. He was an incredible saxophonist and a flutist. And eventually I played guitar and sang lead in rock cover bands and blues bands for about 18 years. Yeah.
I'm so jealous of that.
Oh, it was fun. It was definitely fun. So I got to have that persona that I got to create there of the rock star, right?
Yeah.
And then one of the ways that brought me here was my sister and I created something called the Rocky Horror Fest, where we performed all the songs from the Rocky Horror Show live with a live band and in costume. So I was the female kind of version of Rocky Horror. We had a male version of Rocky Horror, and it was a hoot. We had so much fun. I'll show you those photos later, but I love what you're doing, because it's kind of a beautiful synergy of all the things that I love in one place. I just kind of creating sex positivity on stage, and also inviting other people to get brave, and to normalize the conversation around sex. Totally. Yeah.
And I say this a lot, like courage is a muscle. Like the reason a lot of what I do is so that I can keep the muscle strong. Like I need to have that courage to be able to do what I do on stage. Yeah. So I go on naked bike rides, I do things, like, like where it does require some oomph of putting yourself out there in the world, but it makes it easy, and it makes it, available to other people. Like, she's doing that, I could do that, And I think same thing with, you and Rocky Horror and getting up on stage and owning your sexuality. And we give each other permission.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, I'm absolutely loving this conversation. Incredible to get to know you. Sometimes we all have those moments where we're like, no one understands me. I'm the only person who gets it, So it's also just nice to meet somebody who has some of the same goals, the same mission, the same type of work that we're doing. In some ways very similar, in some ways not, but that's really cool. So thanks for being on the planet.
Pleasure.
Yeah. And putting all this good work out there. Is there anything parting words that you'd like to share before we start to wind down?
It's funny. I have this line in my show that's at the end. It's just, keep sharing, keep asking questions. That none of us are an expert. We're here to teach each other, and we're here to learn from each other. And I feel like that's one of the reasons I wanted to be on your show, is that it feels like our missions are so aligned in this is how we help one another, is by sharing who we are. So I guess that's what I would say is my parting words, is like, keep, be brave and share and keep talking about who you are and what you love. And that's your gift, to the world.
Yeah. That is so beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful way to end the episode here. So just thank you again for your time here, for receiving my team when we reached out to you. I'm so glad that we did and that you said yes. So where can people find you and your work?
So I have a website called Dance Naked Creative. I have a Patreon where I put most of my stuff now. I freaking love having a Patreon because it really encourages me to keep making new work, because I have patrons. And so every month I'm, doing making videos and trying new things. And I have a monthly, like I said, Stand Up Smut, the erotic open mic. And then I'm on, Facebook and Instagram, not on the Twitter anymore. Although that might have been a mistake. I don't know. But I got very righteous and was like, I'm quitting Twitter. And I miss it. But oh well. Anyway, yeah. So I'm on the internet, and then I'm ideally I'm not going to tour this year too much, because I am really enjoying just wanting to be home for a while. And I don't know if you know Portland in the summertime and the surrounding area is just so freaking awesome.
It is.
And often I'm on tour. I go on tour, to fringe festivals and stuff, and I miss it. So this year I'm like, no, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to plan this festival in the fall. So you can find me in Portland right now, but then eventually I'll go back out on tour.
Good for you. That's amazing. And I love Portland. Before we started recording, I follow with Portland right away just for the open-minded feeling and creativity, just letting your hair down, and that mural that says keep Portland weird. I'm all about it. Let's keep Portland quote unquote weird, whatever that is, which to me is
to be a part of that. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time and for the incredible work that you're doing. I have a feeling we're going to meet in person, and so let's keep in touch. And I celebrate you and all your work. So if you do have a new show and you want to come back here and talk about it, I would love to have you do that.
Oh, thank you, Kitty. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.